and the production through interviews of history. And the important word there is interviews. Oral history is interviews. And different people do different kinds of oral history. And I've picked out 3 of the major kinds of practitioners of oral history. The first would be obvious, and that's the historian. The professional historian does oral history as a way of developing evidence for a larger historical topic or event. In my project at the Yale Law School, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to interview people as a way to build evidence and materials for historians to use when they're writing either the history of the Yale Law School or histories related to legal research. And so my effort is to get people to talk about their involvement in legal history. Now, what historians usually do is they do lots and lots of interviews on a particular historical topic or an event, because basically it's eyewitness history, and eyewitness history is fundamentally flawed. If I were to write a history based on one eyewitness account, it would not have the veracity that it should have because it's one account. People see things differently, they interpret things differently. And so what the historian does is take all of these interviews and pull the truth out as best he or she can based on the kinds of training that they have. I once did with students a little experiment to prove this point. I walked into the room with a book in my hand, walked into the room, swirled the book around my head, threw it up against the wall and let it drop. And then we went around the class and I said, what just happened? What did I do? And I got about 30 different interpretations. Oh, well, you didn't step all the way into the room. Yes, you did. No, you didn't swirl the way. You get the point that everybody sees different kinds of events differently. The other example, good example, is that some psychologists from the University of Illinois interviewed people who had seen the World Trade Center tragedy, 700 people. A year later, they went back and talked to the same people, and they got completely different stories out of 50% of them. Oh, I watched it on the television. No, actually, I heard about it. I heard it on the radio. Completely different stories from 50%. So the historian has to have a lot of interviews in order to cull out what the truth really is. One other thing about oral history for historians is that most of these historians obviously are doing recent history. Unfortunately, we can't interview Revolutionary War soldiers or people in the cabinet in Lincoln's administration. But the time will come when we'll have hundreds of years of oral histories from whenever they began until the future. My project, for instance, started in the 1990s, and I was interviewing people who had been at the Yale Law School in the 1920s. So now we're 100 years in, pretty good. So oral history becomes less and less current as we go along. The second good use of interviews is for journalism. And that can range all the way from interviews that I'm sure you've seen and have laughed at, interviews of, let's say, White House press secretaries. I don't know how you really define that as interviews, but they are full of all kinds of other stuff. But those are oral history interviews, and those will eventually make their way into the National Archives and be used for research. All the way from there to the Barbara Walters model, interviewing heads of state, people who are public policy people. Those are also interviews that become part of the history of the United States and part of the serious books that get published. But we're not doing any of that. We're not doing serious academic history. We're not doing journalism. We're doing family history, and that's something else entirely. We're either interviewing family members, cousins, uncles, grandparents, or ourselves. And that's a very different project. When we're doing that, what we're trying to do is get the essence of the person. We want to know what makes them tick. We want to know what their past feels like to them, what the highlights of their lives were, what the pitfalls were, if you can get that. You want to know you really want to know this person. And in order to really know this person, you're not going to walk in with a checklist of questions, short answer questions. You may want to fill in some facts, but you really want to have a conversation with this person. And I think when I talk about how to actually do an interview, I'll go more into how to do that, how to get the most out of someone. But I can say overall, what I try to remember as I sit here and talk to you is not to talk too much. When you're interviewing somebody else, a couple things will happen. One is that you'll be surprised. People love to talk about themselves, and they'll talk. You don't have to worry about pulling information out of them or pulling an idea out of them. They will talk. All you have to do is direct the conversation. And I'll also tell you when you do these interviews, not to worry about meandering around and getting off the topic. That's kind of what you want. If I had to say what's the most valuable thing you'll learn from an interview, I would say the anecdotes. You'll get the dates and the facts and ideas and reminiscences, all of which you want. But what you really want are anecdotes. And they will stick in your mind, and they'll stick in the minds of the people who listen to or read these interviews. I give you an example of my mom, who grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in a little immigrant enclave, a German enclave, next to the Italian one, which was next to the Polish one. Everybody lived sort of separately, but together in the same little section of Newark. And my grandfather was a barber. On Wednesdays, the barbershop was closed. And so all of his buddies came to the barbershop, sat around in the chairs, and played poker. And that was Wednesday. My mom, who was then 8, and I interviewed her and got all of these little stories. This is just one of them, who was 8 then, would come into the room where they were playing poker, and my grandfather would give her a nickel and a pail. And the idea was for her to walk down the street to the end of the street to the corner and fill up the pail with beer at the bar, and then walk back to the barbershop where she had a pail of beer for all of the poker players. And she talked about how she worried about sloshing the beer on her shoes. And when the cars would go by and scare her, it jolted her and she would spill some of the beer. And, you know, all of those little things that would worry an 8-year-old. That's what I remember from my mom's interview. Not all the details, but those little anecdotes. And I urge you to pull those out when you're talking to someone. Also, if you're interviewing yourself, be heavy on the anecdotes. That's what your family is going to want to hear. Before I go, just a transitional comment. Don't wait. I'll say more about this in the next little talk, but don't wait for next month or next year. I've lost too many people that way. you kind of want to do it now. You know, the Nike thing, just do it. So that's what I have. I'm not sure who I'm passing on to, but Lori will know.
Yeah, you can absolutely pass it right off to me.
Okay.
So thanks so much, Bonnie. I absolutely appreciate everything that you mentioned there with the, coming from the more academic side of oral history and more to the personal side of oral history. So here at the museum, we are, in fact, right, in almost the business of preserving these types of histories. And we, in fact, do have an oral history collection here at the museum, which Bonnie has been integral in really kind of developing and understanding and all of the different parts of what an oral history project is like. And so on Saturday morning, if you're interested more about the kind of details about oral history, that is where we'll workshop it a bit more. And Bonnie has already done some awesome stuff for us to help develop this. So, here at the museum, oral histories are one of the most treasured things that we go to, especially for 20th century history. But I will share one little anecdote, and then I'll transition over to Rebecca and Anita, who are definitely going to get a bit more personal about our history as an heirloom and how we want to be remembered. But oral history is a way to shape, of course, your remembrances, to be able to leave a bit of you behind with your family or with a museum like us who preserve these types of things. My favorite project here at the museum was in 2017 when we partnered with the Institute for Refugees and Immigrants, which is a nonprofit out of Bridgeport. And we interviewed 8 different people who came here and made their home in Fairfield County from all over the world, whether they were displaced from their home as refugees or chose to come to Fairfield County, Connecticut. And their stories, and we worked with an oral historian to document their stories and what they preferred to share. And then also how they felt about living in Fairfield or Fairfield County. And their memories and their experiences are now documented here in the museum. So often here in Fairfield, we have, 99.5% white affluent experiences and don't recognize that there are so many people with so many unique backgrounds that make up the fabric and the quilt and the blanket, the threads of who we are today as a nation and also a community. And so we're proud to help preserve those oral histories and many others here at the museum. And so with that, I'll transition right over and welcome Rebecca.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks, Bonnie. That was great. Looking forward to Saturday. Just also want to take a quick thank you to Lori and Anita for all the hard work, making this event successful. I just really think at a time like this, when everyone's feeling a bit isolated with COVID, it's just kind of good to have a forum to speak positively about life. We all know life is precious, and a life well lived is worth remembering and celebrating. Let's see. So I've been a funeral director for about 20 years now, and I've always done my very best to make things as personal and memorable for the families that I serve. But sometimes it's kind of hard because, as I'm sure a few of you have experienced, when you lose someone, you're just not channeling the way that you normally would. No matter how that person passed, it hurts and you're emotional. So you do need support to kind of help you navigate your options. I even think too, in recent years, the role of the funeral director has kind of evolved more into, I'd say we're almost like an event planner now. It's not just simply we bury and cremate people that have died. We try to create an experience for your family so that you can remember and celebrate your loved one.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. You can think of us almost like a concierge service. We help you find the venues. Not every funeral now is in a church or at a funeral home. Hello?
Are you talking?
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Rebecca. You're all right.
Oh, okay. Just making sure.
Yep. Good
So anyways, yes, we can help you with the churches if that's where the funeral is going to be, helping your family with hotel reservations, car service to and from the airports. And then we connect you with celebrants, like Anita's going to talk about here in just a little bit. We hook you up with musicians. We live stream services now. A lot of people can't be there in person because of COVID. So we've been doing a lot of live streaming, and that's been pretty successful. So yeah, there's a lot more to choosing a funeral than just, planning a funeral than just choosing a casket or urn. And there are so many ways to kind of celebrate someone's life. You can have a huge event with multiple speakers, musicians, lots of photos. People love to come in and see the photos from when you were little and, all through your life and your marriage and your kids. People really do love that. I mean, you can opt to do something more formal, like in a church, if that's your family tradition. We still do plenty of that. And some people even just have like a big party in the backyard. Nothing wrong with that at all either. It's just really kind of what feels right to your family. I think we've learned in this series that if you don't tell your story, it can't be passed on. Bonnie just touched on that. She just said, whatever you do, don't wait. I mean, I've met a lot of people over the years that planned on planning, but they didn't. And I mean, it's a hard thing to think to do. And even when I meet with these families, I know the children really want to honor their parents, but, I say things like, what did mom do? Or what was important to your dad? And a lot of times they just kind of look at me and they don't really know. They say, mom was very private, or, dad never talked about personal stuff. So it's hard for them because they want to honor your life, but they don't kind of know where to start. We say, this is your heirloom to pass down to your family. So how do you want to be remembered? Well, you have to tell them. I think sometimes we might get overwhelmed with like how to express ourselves when somebody says, how do you want to be remembered? I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. I think if someone just asked me out of the blue, I would be a little bit like, I don't really know. But what you can do as a gift to your family is think about it now and plan in advance. You can decide how you want your story to be told. Record an oral history of your life, engage your kids in conversation about the past and your thoughts in the future. Even Sky said the other night, she said, even though her grandmother lived to be 103 and a half, she still always expects her to be there. But I think she noticed at some point that if she was ever going to truly remember all those memories, she had to record them in some way. And of course, she's a filmmaker, so she wrote Lives Well Lived and, kind of started helping people realize that they should be doing that. Anyways, it doesn't mean that everyone has to set up a tripod and a camera and hit record. That's not for everybody. But, I just strongly encourage you to at least talk to your family, literally tell them in words, how you want to be remembered and what was important to you so that, when your time on earth has ended, they know what you liked. They know what was important to you. And just to touch upon, so again, you can do this all in advance. Just speaking a little bit about funeral pre-planning. I don't want to get off on a tangent on that, but it is very important. I think it's one of the components of kind of this whole thing. You can start simple. You can start with the technical stuff, like coming in, giving us some information, choosing like the basics, like, do you want to be cremated or do you want to be buried? Where do you want to be buried, or what do you want to be? What do you want to happen to your cremated remains? Those are just kind of some of the technical stuff. And then you can transition to really focus on the service, focus on like the celebration, which is, where Anita comes into play. You can fund your funeral in advance, which is, very helpful so that your family doesn't have the financial expenses when you pass. It's not an easy decision to come in and sit down and go over all of this, but trust me, it's very important. And believe me, it really relieves your family when the time comes. And let's see here. So yeah, I was just transitioning into Anita, Funeral Celebrant. So you would kind of get connected with her once you get some of the logistics settled, because you kind of weave those thoughts and stories together so that when you're gone, your family has that heirloom as seen through your eyes. So yeah, Thank you for listening to me today. And I will just turn this over to Anita.
Let me unmute myself. There I am. So good afternoon, and I'm really glad to be here. I'm a Humanist Celebrant. That means that I commemorate milestone events and occasions with meaningful ceremonies and rituals. So let me share with you. Whoops. Let me go to share screen. So I love this film, Lives Well Lived. It was a great film. If you haven't seen it, I hope you will. It sort of dispelled all those stereotypes that we have about senior citizens and gives new resonance to the expression, age doesn't matter unless you're a cheese. And through the telling of these stories, we really got a glimpse into what it means to live to that ripe old age and achieve a life well lived. We heard from Bonnie about the ways in which one records a life history as a historical record, what others should remember about a time and a place. And then there are those personal memoirs or autobiographies, the moments that we remember that changed our lives in some way that we look back on in hindsight. But there's that other history, the history that others write about you, the family historian. We all have a family historian, someone who's writing that tree, that family tree, someone who looks at and is the curator of all your family history, your photos, and knows the stories of different relatives. So today, I'm going to ask you to reimagine the memorial ceremony as a storytelling event. Whoops. So there we go. Whoops, wait. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what happens after we die. We all know what happens. There's a death, and we mark that death. There's going to be a funeral, an event with ritual and ceremony. It's in our psyches. It's kind of the forgotten milestone because we know what will happen. And yet, somehow, those rituals and ceremonies that we've been used to or that we have sort of imagined is what's expected don't resonate in the same way. 66% of us, according to one industry survey, no longer want a religious component in their funeral. Instead, they're looking for something that's more personal and individualized, that involves them, that tells the story of that person through the eyes of those who are there, the audience. Hear my story and be a witness. So I don't think anybody should write his autobiography until after he's dead. This is the problem. This is what we already do. The most common way we learn about a relative, a parent, a brother, a sister, a person in the community is through that eulogy at the funeral, or maybe an obit in the paper. Who has come away from a memorial thinking, I never knew that about her? He wasn't like that. Why didn't somebody mention? And so often the response can be, that was such a waste of time. In high schools across the country, and I happen to be a high school teacher, one of the favorite lessons of history and English teacher is to have students write an obituary of a famous person. The history teacher focuses on the events and the person's role in those events. The English teacher focuses on personal narrative. What lessons emerge from the story of that person's life? They're both stories about the same person, but told from a different perspective. Sometimes students are asked to write their own eulogy, again, as a writing exercise in storytelling and personal narrative. We're fascinated with the life stories of others. It's why we read biographies and autobiographies and memoirs. And some of them may be or may not be in the obit or eulogy. So here we are, reimagining this memorial ceremony as a storytelling event. And who is coming, excuse me, to listen? Friends and family, acquaintances, maybe even strangers who've heard about us from a friend. Why do we come? Why do we come to listen? We come to remember, to share, to learn, to be inspired. Old stories that have been forgotten, to be reminded of a past, to learn something new, to be comforted by the company of others and by the stories of others who also remember. What do we want? What do we want when we come? And this is something that's so personal and individualized. Maybe we want confirmation. Maybe we just want to know. There have been questions that haven't been answered. I remember being called by a funeral director who came to me and said, I don't know what to do. And I went and talked to this young man whose father had died after a long illness and with whom he had been estranged for many years due to his parents' divorce. But after a year of caregiving, he had so many unanswered questions. He wanted to honor his father's past, but what was it? All he knew was that at Passover, he told his son that he too crossed the desert and made it to Israel. He wondered, was that true? Or was it a metaphor that his father was trying to tell him? His father was from Iraq. He wanted a gravesite that was near where he lived so that he could go and visit him. He wanted to notify an aunt, but his mother, who was mentally unstable, threatened to not come to the funeral. And as the humanist celebrant, as the celebrant, I listened. And that perhaps is one of the most important responsibilities of the person doing the interviewing or questioning is listening. We become listeners. Could I help this young man find answers? Help him get understanding. I discovered that in 1949, the Iraqi king threw out the Jews, and those who weren't airlifted to Israel did indeed cross the desert. A reconciliation was reached, and his aunt came from New Jersey. The funeral director found a private Catholic cemetery close to his home that would accept the body because his mother was Christian. He wanted to honor his father's Jewish roots, but his father was not a religious man. He was an engineer. He didn't know exactly how to do that. I suggested the tradition of placing stones on the grave, symbolic not of life's ephemeralness, but of the endurance of memories. So here we are. Who is the absent storyteller? That's the person who died. That could be you, that could be me. And who do I want to tell my story to? For each person, the answer will be different. Maybe it's your family, but maybe also it's your friends, your bridge partners, your neighbors, your colleagues. Should it be just family? My mother had neighbors who all looked after her and kept asking me when the memorial would be. What do you want to say? Is there something you wish to communicate? Maybe there's something that others wish you would communicate. What do you want to tell about your past, your feelings, your philosophy? Something that you would like to pass on to your family and friends. What's the purpose of the memorial? Is it to bring everybody together, to clarify things, to celebrate your life? Is it to remember, to remind others of who you were, or of your philosophy, or what's important? How do you want this to be accomplished? How will it be somehow told and communicated? My very first memorial was for a woman who at 80, just turned 80, dropped dead suddenly from a massive heart attack, and her family was in shock. But she had told her daughters the month before that she wanted a Humanist Celebrant to preside over her memorial. She had been in perfect health. She was a retired physician, was one of the first trained children's psychologists, and at 75, she had taken up the piano again and become a composer of original works. She was active in civic affairs, a book club, an avid gardener, and bird lover. By choosing the humanist, she was telling her family she wanted to celebrate her life and not to focus on any hereafter. She wanted them to think about her philosophy of life, their relationship to her, and their relationships to one another. She wanted it to be in her garden where she loved watching the birds. So now I'm going to ask each of you to think about what the purpose of a funeral ceremony is. And you know, I forgot in my introduction to tell you that you will all need your smartphones and to participate in these polls that we're going to be doing today. So if you take out your smartphone, you're going to text. You're going to text to the number 37607, and then you're going to text Anita Peters, ANITA, Peters, PETERS, 847. And you will be able to get to respond and take the poll. Anybody having trouble?
So you can also use, if you don't have your smartphone available, you can also, if you're on your laptop, you can minimize this presentation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop in the link, and you can use the laptop or computer or whatever it is that you're viewing this on. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat for you to hopefully connect you right through. So these are really fun. We actually use these polls on Sunday night with Sky Bergman, and it's actually still active. If you go to our Facebook page, we asked everyone on Sunday night, while you're getting yourself settled with your smartphone and following the directions on the screen, I'll tell you the story. We ran this poll and we asked people to text or enter in the internet browser through our poll, what word would you use to describe a life well lived? And I see people are actually, yay, they're working. It's working, yay. We're always excited when technology works for us. And so that poll is actually still open. And if you go to the museum's page, you can click on the link and text through. So look at that, Anita, your tech is working. Woo!
Yes, good, excellent. So, yes, you can answer more than once. So we can see how each of us view what the ceremony is about: to acknowledge the event, to honor, to remember, to share, comfort others. That's interesting. Not many people see it as a way to comfort others. So this is all fascinating, and it will be different, but it's a question that you should be asking each other and yourselves. So if that's our purpose, and let me just go back here. So to acknowledge the event, to remember, to honor, I'm looking at the top ones, to share, to celebrate. How do we accomplish that? How do we do that? How do we communicate that? How do we envision that as being achieved? Do we share and break bread together? Have a meal? In the case of Sky, it was important to her to get that recipe from her grandmother, how she made that bread. We saw that bread. Do we plant a tree and make sure that it is something that we can look at as it grows, as a memory? Do we do something together, create a sculpture, this rock sculpture, as something communal, meditative, reflective? Do we create a star, name a star? There are many different ways to express our values. Do we have our ashes scattered? Do we keep them? Do we want to give to a charity? So here we go back to another poll. What would you like to include in your ceremony? And for this, you actually have to go to the web and put into your browser pollev.com/Anita Peters 847. Let's see if I can I put this? Can you put that into the chat, Lori? Oh, there we go. People are seeing it. And you can even put a thumbs up on any of the ones that are up there.
And this one's much more creative, Anita. We have to think of something.
Yes. So this one is a brainstorming activity. So we get to each, put our thumbs up for singing, sharing memories, putting something else that you would like to do. What would you like your ceremony to include? A meal. A friend of mine added that baseball stories. Great food. I love that. Nature. So it gets you to start thinking, what do you want to happen? How do you want to be remembered at your service? I'm shifting the conversation now to those practical considerations and the planning, those difficult conversations. How do we decide when to hold a memorial? In some traditions, there's an immediacy for the interment of the body, and many link the burial to the ceremony, but it does not have to be. Cremation is now the preferred choice for over 60% of the population, and in certain parts of the country, it's even more than that. With cremation, it makes it even less of a necessity to hold that ceremony immediately at the time of death. There's no correct time for when to hold a memorial or end of life celebration. It will depend on when the story begs to be told or shared. For someone with Alzheimer's, it may be before their memories go, a party with family and friends. Similarly, when do you begin the planning? When Joan Rivers, the comedian, died suddenly after a routine medical procedure, her daughter knew exactly what kind of party she wanted to have. When my mother died, the memorial was left to me. She was cremated. She wanted her ashes scattered in the Gulf of Mexico. And I was the one who was responsible for distributing her belongings, closing out her condo, going through her files. It took months, and it was cathartic, it was meditative, it was even healing, but no one else was participating in that experience with me. Neighbors kept asking me, was there going to be a memorial? And I responded, yes. When I finally emailed my children and my nephews and niece, which was almost a year after my mother had passed away, the response was, about time, Mom. Like, come on, let's do it. And it was only then that I realized that I had been selfish and not considered their feelings. This past Sunday, one of the participants described how her children had bought their grandmother, her mother, a diary with set questions which she was to answer privately, not share them with her, and that diary would be shared with them at her death. I thought that was a wonderful gift for both the grandmother and for the children. So here we are. We've talked about purpose and timing. Now I'm going to shift this conversation again, because a death focuses our attention on our mortality. Seize the day, we think. We think of bucket lists. What is left to do? What didn't I do? What can I do? What is in my future? Memories are transformative. They bring us back to a past, to a moment, to inspire, to reflect, to teach, maybe even regret. A death shocks us into thinking of our own mortality. At memorials, at funerals, we each become witnesses, activated people telling other people's stories. That's that absent storyteller. How will we remember our mortality? Will we keep a photo, that memento mori? Remember, you will die. Remember, you will die. Memento mori. But seize the day. Will we keep a photo close by? Do we want ashes in a special urn? Do we want that tree planted in our yard? Do we want that memoir? that recorded history that we can go back to and look at or listen to. So I'm going to ask you, what would you like to leave others with? What would be the memento that you would like to leave and give them maybe at that ceremony? Doesn't have to be a keepsake. It could be something personal, a story that you share, that anecdote that Bonnie mentioned, a saying. And this can be something that's perhaps given away. Well, I had a gentleman who was a race car driver, and the memento that was given away was one of those little Matchbox cars. Everybody knew that that would be a good memento.
Anita,
I had another celebrant tell me that coffee was really important every morning. The person had had a special cup of coffee, and so the whole, everyone in the ceremony, they all went out to her favorite coffee shop and got a cup of coffee. So there are all different things that you can do and share, or a recipe, or that bread, so that's definitely important. So here we go. History, happiness, family, saying. Yes. So peace. What are some of the ways in which we achieve peace together? For some people, it might be a meditation. For others, it could be music. Listening to music can be very peaceful and calming. It could be a reading of a poem, or even the singing of a song that becomes sort of meditative and peaceful. So there are ways in which you can introduce that idea, that feeling of peace, even a ritual, the lighting of candles or the holding of hands, where you take hands together. That can be a moment, a peaceful moment within the ceremony. So these are things that you can do and think about. So I love this. It looks great. I'm going to move to my final slide. So if you take away one message from this presentation this afternoon, I hope it is to remember to be a storyteller and to reimagine the memorial ceremony as an event where stories are told, shared, and understood. At death, we become the absent storyteller. Let's be sure to plan its telling. And with that, I'd like to leave you with this Sanskrit poem, which is my favorite poem. And it's even on my website. Listen to the exhortation of the day. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation of the dawn. So thank you for listening, and I hope I've given you some food for thought.
so what I'll do is I'm going to share my screen and unmute yourself and chat as you'd like.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's fun. Look at
Yeah,
that.
This is very fun. I'm actually going to also drop another link in the chat for you to just be able to download this as a Microsoft Word document. I posted it on our website. So if you actually were to go to the event calendar for this particular event, you can download it there as well afterwards. I can also send it to you after via email. So this is this is an I am poem, right? So this is such a wonderful activity to, number one, write as a poem, right? A more literary experience. It's also, if you've ever been to a poetry reading or a performance opportunity, you can certainly use this to say, I am, like a, something in a box, or I don't know, I'm not very performance or literary, just to give you a little bit of background. But this is a really fun thing to consider, but also to leave behind. It is a bit of a memoir writing activity. I've seen, from my experience in working in Boston, this is a wonderful activity to do with high school students who are finding their way. And trying to manage all of those emotions and things that are happening within their brains and their lives. But it is a quite beautiful thing to consider. And so I will open up a few minutes for you to perhaps grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, and to perhaps start to acknowledge your own I am poem. For example, I will say, number one, today, who I am may not be who I am tomorrow. Things happen in our lives that we cannot plan or predict, and they create different versions of ourselves in every second, because every second is new. So if I were to write this today, right now, from my work self, I would say, I am proud and humbled by today's event with all of you. And I wonder what you are considering moving forward, if you've been opened up to anything in today's program. I see such a lovely community here on this call, and I want for you to leave here today feeling as if we connected for you to have a wonderful way to be remembered in the future. And so there is my off the cuff I am poem. But you can always, Anita's giving me the thumbs up. But you can certainly use this in an overall life perspective, or perhaps even to manage an emotion, a negative emotion that you're dealing with at the present moment, right? It's always good to take those 10 deep breaths and those acknowledging, but have some fun with it. Or
to do it with a grandchild.
Oh, can you imagine how fun?
Yeah, that can be.
Or our own children.
Or your own children as an opening.
So fun.
Exactly.
I mean, can you imagine doing this, for instance, at family gatherings, and then collecting them all from the people in a family? I mean, that would be a wonderful book to leave behind. That would be really fun.
Trying to give you
question for Anita, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah, so one of the things that I was curious about, I really loved all the suggestions that you made about questions for people to ask before they plan a ceremony, and how there are so many variations and different people are going to answer these questions differently. And then I thought to myself, I sort of thought of the way I would answer those in terms of how I would want to be remembered. And then it occurred to me that, the people who are left behind may have different needs about how someone should be remembered than I do. And, because I'm thinking about, someone that I lost and what I would want to do about remembering them. And I never really got the chance to ask them. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on striking that balance. I mean, one obvious thing to me is I would never want to plan a ceremony for someone that would violate who they are. So, if they were a non-religious person, I wouldn't want to have a religious ceremony. That's quite obvious. But there are other things that are less obvious, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that issue.
Well, I think, again, it has to do with you having a conversation with your, with those who you leave behind. Because, of course, it depends on, the people who are grieving, or the ones who are affected by your death. They're going to reflect upon it differently. But this is really for you to think about what it is that you hope that they will think about. So as an example, I was just thinking about at one of the death cafes that I participated in, which is a death cafe is an informal conversation just about death, that taboo subject. Everybody can just say what they're thinking about. And I remember this one woman saying, well, my mother passed away and she was cremated, and we have her ashes in an urn, and she wanted nobody to do anything with it. And my father is now thinking, our father who was ill, and he was saying that when I die, I want my ashes to be mixed with my wife's ashes. And this had created this whole big family discussion. Oh my God, you can't do that because she didn't want that, and then the other sister was going, no, who cares? She's already dead. It doesn't matter. So how do you honor, the person and who makes those decisions? Sometimes we make decisions after that perhaps they are incongruous to the person because we're making them for ourselves. But the point is, I think that you are, as I call it, the absent storyteller. What is it that you would like to be shared? That's what's important to be communicated. And then others will tell you, I don't know if I can do that, so that is, so someone may be very upset that the body is cremated because that's not what they feel is important, that somehow destroys the body. But then it's really what is talking about your wishes, the absent storyteller, and having those conversations beforehand, so that that's the way you're honored.